Palestinians are hostages too. Indeed, there are far more Palestinian hostages than their unjustly imprisoned Israeli counterparts, and the conditions they've suffered are overall much worse. As both Israelis and Palestinians who've been held in protracted captivity are released to their loved ones, this is important to discuss. It's been a time of profound trauma, both for those held captive and their families and their friends, and seeing the footage of them being reunited is profoundly moving. What's lacking is moral and political consistency. As ever, the coverage in the Western media has been deeply racist, once again stripping away the human worth of Palestinians, be they living or slaughtered. Now, I've come under fire on this question from apologists for Israel's genocidal onslaught, who seem to harbour the illusion that they can both be cheerleaders for one of the most obscene crimes of our age and retain some sort of moral high ground. Guess what? You can't. That's because of language I've used to describe the exchange agreements which have freed both Palestinians and Israelis who've been held in captivity. Put simply, it's difficult to settle on a pithy description. Many Western media outlets settle on hostage and prisoner exchange agreements, but this erases the fact that many Palestinians are themselves hostages. Now, as I've said from the beginning, the taking of Israeli civilians as hostages by Hamas and other militants was an indefensible war crime. They should never have been taken, and they should all be free. Those same human rights apply to the far greater numbers of Palestinians who've had their freedom taken away with no just cause. Indeed, in 2021, 3 Palestinian NGOs estimated that 1 million Palestinians had been incarcerated since Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza began in 1967. Of those, 50,000 were children and 17,000 were women. Crucially, tens of thousands of Palestinians were subjected to administrative detention before 7th of October. What's administrative detention? As the Israeli human rights organisation B'Tselem puts it, in administrative detention, a person is held without trial without having committed an offence, on the grounds that he or she plans to break the law in the future. As this measure is supposed to be preventative, it has no time limit. The person is detained without legal proceedings by order of the regional military commander based on classified evidence that is not revealed to them. This leaves the detainees helpless, facing unknown allegations with no way to disprove them, not knowing when they will be released, and without being charged, tried, or convicted. Spending months or years behind bars without being charged or even told what you're accused of. These are hostages. But what are those Palestinians who are convicted? Well, most Palestinians stand trial in Israeli military courts. These trials are over in minutes. The judges and the prosecution are serving Israeli soldiers. The trials are conducted in Hebrew, and the conviction rate is over 99%. These are sham trials. Israeli citizens living in the West Bank, on the other hand, are covered by Israel's civil justice system and are tried in civic courts. Welcome to apartheid. As for children, as Human Rights Watch put it in 2015, Israeli security forces have used unnecessary force to arrest or detain Palestinian children as young as 11. Security forces have choked children, thrown stun grenades at them, beaten them in custody, threatened and interrogated them without the presence of parents or lawyers, and failed to let their parents know their whereabouts. In other words, kidnapping. It gets worse. According to a Save the Children report in July 2023, that is months before 7th of October, child detainees are subjected not only to physical abuse, with 86% reporting being beaten and nearly half injured as they're arrested, including bullet wounds and broken bones. Child detainees reported being sexually abused by Israeli soldiers as well. Now, it was estimated at the time that between 500 and 1,000 Palestinian children were held in military detention every year. Israel is the only country on the face of the earth which systematically imprisons children through military courts. Now, the main alleged crime against these children was stone throwing, which carries a prison sentence of up to 20 years for kids. Now, as an Amnesty International report into Israel's apartheid in 2022 found, Israel has long used torture against detainees. Indeed, as they noted, a 2000 report by the Israeli State Comptroller found that in the First Intifada between 1988 and 1992, Israel's security agency used systematic torture against Palestinians and regularly lied about it. That included painful shackling and binding, immobilization and stress positions, sleep deprivation, the use of threats, including against family members, sexual harassment, prolonged and extensive use of solitary confinement. Now, since 7th October, these heinous practices have only intensified and are much worse. There are more than 300 Palestinian children in Israeli custody, with 112 of them in administrative detention. We don't know the full number of Palestinians held in administrative detention, but by the end of June 2024, the Israeli Prison Service said they had 3,340 Palestinians in administrative detention. Remember, these people are held without charge or trial and have no idea why they're even there. Indeed, Israel is also guilty of the crime against humanity, which is the mass, forcible disappearance of civilians. Thousands simply disappeared without their families being told where they are. How are these not hostages? Consider the conditions these Palestinian hostages are being subjected to. Consider Steed Timon, a prison camp with conditions which are gruesome beyond description. According to the Israeli human rights organisation B'Tselem, the testimonies of Palestinian detainees reveal that Palestinians currently in Israeli prisons are being subjected to harsh, arbitrary violence on a frequent basis. Sexual assault, humiliation, degradation, deliberate starvation, forced lack of hygiene, sleep deprivation, restriction and punishment of religious worship, confiscation of all group and personal belongings, and denial of adequate medical care. Indeed, Palestinians tied to beds in nappies and then repeatedly beaten up. Cases of their genitals being electrocuted. Now, there's overwhelming documented evidence of rape and gang rape of Palestinian detainees. Take Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, one of Gaza's most prominent doctors and head of orthopedics at the now destroyed Al-Shifa hospital. According to Human Rights Watch, other detainees testified that 3 Israeli soldiers had taken it in turns to rape him with their M16 rifles. It's believed Dr. al-Bursh may have died because he was literally raped to death by Israeli soldiers. In another example, Israeli soldiers were filmed gang raping a detainee. Because Israel's authorities feared further arrest warrants over torture and rape, there was a rare attempt to arrest the soldiers responsible, which triggered literal riots on the streets of Tel Aviv, attended by Israeli ministers who were there literally rioting in support of the right to rape. Just imagine we were discussing this is the treatment of Israeli hostages at the hands of Palestinian militants. All of this would just be used to show just the utter barbarism, evil beyond imagination. Not so here. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. I mean, this just shows the power of racism. How racism is used in these situations, justifying, of course, a Western ally subjugating an entire people and subjecting them to unimaginable horror in the process. Just shows the power of racism. As soon as the people suffering literally just limitless barbarism are not seen as you or I, as like us, people like us, any barbarism can be justified, or the outrage is turned off. If a fraction of this we were discussing were the hostages taken by Hamas and other militants, which I've said is a serious war crime in its own right, by the way, Just imagine the discussion. Indeed, little wonder Gideon Levy, the courageous Israeli journalist, over a year ago discussed the much worse human conditions suffered by those Palestinians deprived of freedom compared to their Israeli counterparts.
What they do now to the prisoners is unbelievable. I can almost say in certainty, even though I'm not sure, but that the Palestinian prisoners in Israel get much worse human conditions than the hostages in Gaza. You know, they holded hundreds of Palestinians. They handcuffed for weeks and months with their eyes covered.
I would note the self-proclaimed liberal Zionist Shael Ben Ephraim, who was originally tweeting in support of Israeli soldiers humiliating detainees by parading them mostly naked in front of cameras, came to change his mind last July, saying he was stupid and ashamed for believing that reporting by the New York Times and CNN on the horrors inflicted against Palestinian detainees were all anti-Semitic lies. As he noted, not only were these detainees subjected to obscene torture, he says worst of all, many of the people in this facility were innocent, rounded up by accident. Wow, the penny really has dropped. Again, despite his change of heart, continuing to show his naivety there. Now, some will go, some of those detained are Palestinian militants. Absolutely. No question about that at all. There were also Israeli soldiers amongst those who were taken on the 7th of October. In all of these cases, they should be treated as prisoners of war with all the rights that entails. And I note that has not been respected either by those Israeli soldiers who were taken captive and the far greater numbers of Hamas militants. But the point is, and this really is the point, Israel has kidnapped Palestinians en masse on an industrial scale. It is right, as I've kept doing, absolutely right to condemn, to have more consistency, to condemn the taking of Israeli hostages. There is no defence. They should all be freed, and they should always have been freed. If you are not a racist, and you believe that Palestinian civilians have equal worth to Israeli civilians, then you should support the freeing of the far greater numbers of Palestinian hostages, including children. Indeed, there's more Palestinian children in Israeli custody than the total number of Israeli hostages taken on 7th of October. You should also note that the conditions endured by Palestinian hostages are overall much, much worse. Indeed, the far worse crimes perpetrated against them that we know about, which have been identified. And people go, well, I mean, just even talking about this is going to set outrage off, isn't it? Facts, talking literal facts. I mean, you know, it's absolutely right that, firstly, anyone who takes hostages, that's a crime. And any further crimes committed against those hostages need to be investigated. What we know about is the crimes, the violence perpetrated against innocent Palestinians who haven't been convicted of anything are much worse. And there's many, many more of them. Not discussed in the media, because our media is racist. Not even subtly racist. This isn't subtle. Now, all hostages should be released. The failure of the Western media to cover this accurately drips of unapologetic, rampant anti-Palestinian racism. It must be called out. And it will be called out over and over again. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for, to tell the truth. And the thing is, to quote an American right-winger, facts don't care about your feelings. Turns out that's true, isn't it? So we'll keep speaking the truth, however much that angers people, because facts are facts. The evidence is the evidence. And this remains one of the worst crimes of our age. And indeed, the point I'd make about all the crimes I'm talking about is these are all facilitated by our governments and our media organisations. So it's much greater. The crimes are worse. The numbers of people suffering are worse. And it's all facilitated by our governments and our media. That's why we'll keep calling out. Please like and subscribe. If your thoughts, your comments, all good for the algorithm. Share the video. Get the message out. Help us expand our operations as we're currently doing. I hope you've all been seeing that. At patreon.com/owenjones84. Listen to some podcasts. I'll speak to you soon.